Yeah, we back. Now, I hate doing this topic because I feel like, it's very elementary for me at this point for me to constantly repeat myself. It's like, but anyways, we got to constantly debunk these outdated narratives until they're obsolete. So anyways, I dropped a video last night, sometime yesterday, entitled Oshiedu Jackson versus Nigerians. Now, for those of y'all who watched that video, you already know what it was about. And for the most part, most people in the comment section understood where I was coming from. I basically said, I have no problem with what Akon said. My brother's success is my success. That's how I looked at it, right? I didn't take offense. But I got some interesting comments in the comment section. Take a look up on the screen. This person said, all of the empires you named sold out ancestors. They are the reason there is a diaspora. I must admit, I still have a problem with that. A conversation needs to be had. And I responded to this person and I said this: how can you sell out an enemy nation during that time in pre-colonial Africa? That makes no sense. Can an American sell out a Russian? They're both white, but they are enemies currently at war. Your knowledge of African history is very juvenile and distorted. I already have a playlist called Debunking the Slave Trade. Go educate yourself. It's 2023. The knowledge is free. Your ancestors were not innocent victims, so stop crying. Your ancestors also engaged in predatory warfare against their enemies for thousands of years. Do you think your ancestors were some innocent bystanders back in Africa? Very convenient and self-serving narrative. There is no conversation to have unless you're willing to admit that your ancestors also engaged in warfare and conquest, just like all other groups of men throughout history. Now, I gotta say this, man. As somebody who is also a descendant of the transatlantic slave trade, whose ancestors were also sold into slavery, I'm gonna need y'all to stop speaking for me, man. Because whenever I hear somebody talking about how the Africans allegedly sold them into slavery, I already know your level of understanding is at a very low level. And you need to go back to the drawing board before you come and have a debate with me. And I already have a playlist where I already debunked these talking points already, man. So go check that out, man. Take a look up on the screen. As you can see, these 4 videos, it's not a long playlist, but I pretty much knocked out all them outdated narratives that have been circulating for a while. Number one, the framing of the argument is dishonest because the statement is said in a way to imply that my ancestors were back in Africa minding their business, tending to their garden, and then some savage Africans, grabbed them up and put them on the boats. We wasn't even doing nothing back in Africa. We never heard a fly back in Africa. Back in Africa, we was reading the Bible and going to church. Nigga, stop it, bro. Well, I can only speak for me. I ran the DNA. I know I come from a long line of black men that was back in Africa going crazy. You know what I'm saying? I know I come from a long line of black men. When those black men came around, niggas was running scared. Niggas was running scared. So I hate when y'all come around to, they sold me. I was just an innocent African. I was just an innocent African sold into slavery. Bro, shut up. God, it's not manly. All groups of men have engaged in conquest, warfare, you name it, throughout history. Come on, man. It doesn't matter where you land, anywhere in the world, anywhere on the continent, anywhere in Europe, anywhere in Asia, anywhere in ancient North America, South America, the Caribbean, the Native Americans. Bro, men have always engaged in warfare and conquest wherever they was at for money and power, dominance, territory, whatever it may be. So before you come around playing that victim shit with me, I'm going to need you to, number one, prove to me that you do not descend from a pre-colonial African nation that was not engaged in the slave trade. If you run a DNA, come run a DNA. Tell me where your DNA traces back to, what ancient pre-colonial African kingdom. So number one, most likely, they were probably engaged in the slave trade, number one. And number two, if they weren't engaged in the slave trade, you need to come prove to me that your ancestors going all the way back to the first man, to the first human being, all the way down to where you are today. You need to prove to me that they never ever engaged in any form of predatory warfare or conquest against another group of people. You need to prove those 2 things to me before I accept your victim narrative, your victim card. Because as it stands right now, your victim card is declined in my book because I think you're gonna have a hard time doing that. And I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the Western education that we are given, or maybe because we are not familiar with these ancient stories of black men, conquering and just amassing power and wealth and dominance and becoming world famous, geopolitical powerhouses. Maybe because you're not really familiar with those stories that you just automatically assume the position of victim. You think that your natural position in this world is that of the victim, right? The white man victimized me. The continental African victimized me. The black woman victimized me. Everybody, the Mexican immigrant victimized me. Like, you know what I mean? Some of you niggas is so bitch made that you don't know what it's even like to be, a black man having power and prestige and dignity. You just assume the position of victim. You think your natural position in the world is that of the victim, right? You live in a first world nation on YouTube, got motherfucking Wi-Fi, all this fly shit, probably on a goddamn iPhone, still crying about some Africans that sold you into slavery. Man, listen, some of you men are not men. Some of you men are not men. And one thing I hate is the framing of the narrative as well. They sold me out. They sold me out. And when you hear somebody say that, you already know They're attaching modern day racial classifications to pre-colonial African men who did not see or function off the basis of race. And to be honest, the whole race thing is a recent phenomenon in the past couple centuries. No group of men really function off race. The European man, the Native American man, the Asian man, none of them function off race, because where you lived at, where you grew up at, you're pretty much going to be among your own race from birth until death. So that cannot be the deciding factor on what you go off, right? The European man did not see race. They were going back and forth, going to war for 1,000+ years before they finally got it together in the past 100 years. And they still going back and forth. They still beefing. The Russian man, the American man, they still going back and forth. And that's why in the comment, I had asked him, can an American sell out a Russian? Because what is the difference between the conflicts that are going on right now between the white Americans and the Russians, or the conflicts that happen between the French and the British, the Spanish and the Portuguese, the Austrians and the Swedes, the Polish, Napoleon invading Eastern Europe, Adolf Hitler going crazy all over Europe, the world wars? What is the difference? So all other groups of men are allowed to live in their full totality, in their total aspect. You don't hear none of this feminine rhetoric coming from any other group. In fact, in 2 months, a movie about Napoleon is about to come out. Napoleon, who spent the majority of his life going to war against other white men. But you don't ever hear no white man talking about, oh, Napoleon sold us out. Napoleon is responsible for the deaths of millions of whites. And millions of blacks too, but millions of whites. But you never hear nobody talk about, oh, Napoleon sold out the white race. They sold us out. He sold out my ancestors. What? The reason they don't do that is because they understand the geopolitical context of that time. They knew there was no racial unity and racial harmony among the races during that time. It was about national prestige, national honor, power for the homeland. That's what it was about. It wasn't about power based on race, unity based on race. No, it was about power based in nationhood. It wasn't until the mid to late 1800s, that's when you had the literature, the science, the media began to solidify the concept of race into the minds of the people. But throughout the majority of human history, the concept of race wasn't really the deciding factor. Especially when you grow up in a society populated and surrounded by your own race. Sometimes you can live an entire existence without seeing another race. So when that's the case, you have to go based on different criteria, right? Language, culture, spirituality, geography, nationality. And the reason why people don't understand this or respect this is because the context of which African history is told. Like I said this in the previous videos in that playlist. When people talk about African history, you notice the way they tell the story is very vague, right? They usually mention the Africans. They never really give them the respect of referring to them as their actual, nations. Like when they talk about the Europeans, we specify. We say, okay, we're talking about the Germans. We're talking about the French. We're talking about the British, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch. We give them their honor and respect by actually referring to them as what they were called. But when it comes to the Africans, we just say, oh, the Africans sold me. The Africans, this vague term, the Africans. Okay, they can never tell you, okay, it was this specific nation that sold me in this year, and I can trace my roots back to this specific African kingdom. They don't got no names because they don't give the Africans the same respect as they give the European. And a large part of that is because of that Western Eurocentric education that we are given. And unfortunately, because we got a lot of our people sitting in these classrooms learning this curriculum, they come out these universities, these high schools, these centers of learning, talking the same bullshit. And then they come around me talking stupid, and then I gotta make the correction. And for me, I just can't stand to hear it because, number one, when you say that, you automatically just put all of us who are sold into slavery. Don't put that victim jacket on me. Don't turn my ancestors into some bitches like you. I embrace my ancestors in their full totality. From the common man to the farmer, to the artisan, to the doctor, to the military man, to the general, to the noble, to the king. I embrace my ancestors in their full totality. Their good qualities, their bad qualities, their flaws, their imperfections. I really love my ancestors. I understand my ancestors. I communicate with my ancestors. So, I don't put all this victim-minded bullshit on my ancestors. I don't condemn the continental Africans because we got the same ancestors. You dumb. Y'all boys is really, y'all don't want it with me, man. You're just not very smart, man. You're just not very smart. And it was so crazy because he came into the comment section. You know that video that I put out yesterday about O'Shea? It was because Akon said that, Akon said the Nigerians were so smart. So he came into the comment section with this comment because he was offended that, he was offended by what Akon said. And obviously, brother, look at the arguments you're making. Obviously, you're not very smart. Obviously, you're not very smart, bro. Come on, bro. Obviously, you're not very smart. So just sit down, bro. Sit down, take a seat, man. Subscribe to the channel. We can teach you a few things, man. Jesus Christ. And before I get out of here, I just want to ask, how come we never use this type of rhetoric against other groups of men? How come we never say the Native Americans sold out the other Native American nations when they were going back and forth, when they were going to war, when they were sacrificing each other to their deities? How come we never say they sold each other out? How come the Native Americans ain't sitting around crying like bitches and hoes? Talking about, you sold me out. You sacrificed my great-great-grandmama. It's only the black man talking like this, bro. It's only the black man. How come the white man ain't sitting around talking like this? How come the Frenchman ain't crying to the Britishman? You sold me out. You sold me out back in 1802. You sold me out. Bro, it's only the black man crying, bro. It's only the black man crying, as if all groups of men haven't engaged in predatory warfare and conquest against each other for the sole purpose of acquiring power, wealth, and domination in their respective regions. That's not something that is unique to us. That is something that is part of human nature. That's part of the human experience since men have been walking around wherever they have been located at. And the reason why I gotta keep touching on this topic is because we gotta really put this topic in the dirt, bro. It's like, bro, this is like some outdated technology, bro. Like, come on, bro. You still using the Nintendo 64? Get some new arguments, my nigga. We got the iPhone now, bro. Bro, you still on the goddamn Game Boy. Like, catch up, bro. These outdated arguments like a big back TV. This shit is old technology, bro. This shit old news. We've been through this argument in the dust. This narrative is dusty. And like I said, the only way I would accept this argument coming from anybody is if, number one, you can prove to me that your ancestors never engaged in any form of conquest or predatory warfare against any other group of people for the millions of years that you've been on this earth. You have to prove that to me. And I know you're not going to be able to do that. The only purpose of that argument is to draw a line in the sand or draw a division between continental Africans and those in the diaspora. And I'm not going to let you do that. I'm not going to let you create no barrier between me and my brothers on the continent. Number one, because those who were sold into slavery, they left family behind on the continent. We share the same ancestral lines. And the fact of the matter is this: whether we are on the continent or in the diaspora, our hands are not clean. Our hands are not clean. We had a long history of warfare back on the African continent. We had a long history of conquest on the African continent. We had a long history of imperialism on the African continent, where one African nation would subdue another African nation and force them to pay tribute. It was a lot of that going on back in Africa. So none of our hands are clean. So stop this victim narrative. You know, the white man is victimizing me. The continental African victimizing me. The black woman victimizing me. Everybody victimizing you. Are you a man? Are you a man? Everybody victimizing you. Are you not a man? Because I'm going to keep it real. Whenever y'all say that to me, y'all don't sound like no men. What y'all don't understand is when you study history, you're not supposed to study history to solidify your position and status as a victim. You're supposed to study history to learn from the mistakes, to understand, okay, our forefathers did not have the foresight to understand the concept of race. So because they did not have the foresight to understand the concept of race, that left them weakened, that left them vulnerable. So now as black men in the modern day, we have to understand this and move forward. We have to understand and keep in the back of our mind, have a race consciousness, understand, even though my brother comes from a different location, different nation, that's still my brother. I gotta have his back against any foreign adversary, because at the end of the day, those same foreign adversaries that want to do harm against us, they're gonna attack us based on race. They're gonna put us in the same box, in the same group. So I gotta have my brother's back. That's something that our forefathers didn't understand. So when you study history, you're supposed to study history to correct your mistakes. You're not supposed to study history to solidify your status as a victim. And to be honest, you're not even studying history, because when you say that bullshit, oh, African sold me, I was an innocent African, I was farming my rice, and then I was just snatched up. I was snatched. My people never hurt anybody. We never did anything to anybody. No, whenever you come around talking like that, I understand you have never studied history. I know you're just regurgitating something you've heard from somebody else. You know, a quick summary you heard from somebody else. You have no functional understanding of African history at all. But I guarantee you're well versed in European history, though. I guarantee you're well versed in European history, because that's how they train you to be a good trained monkey who knows everything about European history but doesn't know shit about African history. That's the majority of you dudes. And whenever somebody comes up to me with this stupid narrative, I always ask them, what is the difference between the various conflicts and engagements that occurred between the various African ethnic groups, and also the various conflicts and engagements that occurred between the European ethnic groups that was happening around the same exact time? What's the difference? What's the difference? How come you don't bring that same energy to the Europeans? How come you don't bring that same energy to the Asians, the Native Americans, etc., etc.? All groups of men have engaged in conquest and warfare against each other. But why are you coming down so hard on the African? Why? Are you not an African? Do you not share the same ancestral line? The ones who were sold into slavery, they didn't leave family members behind? So why are you making the separation and the division? And it's so crazy because when you think about it, around the same time that Napoleon Bonaparte was going crazy all over Europe, marching all over Europe, Shaka Zulu was marching all over South Africa around the same time. Around the same exact time, bro. Because that was the concept of that time. Shaka Zulu was marching against other black men. Napoleon was marching against other white men. That was the political context of that time. It wasn't based on race just yet. That didn't come until like a century later. And like I said before, Napoleon is responsible for the deaths of millions of Europeans. Napoleon vanquished millions of Europeans, man. He had so many military campaigns, bro. Napoleon waged war against the Austrians, the Kingdom of Naples, the Ottomans, the Russians, the Prussians, the Swedes, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the British. And he was not the only one. I can give you a long list of European leaders, Asian leaders, Native American leaders that waged war against men from their same race. And the reason for that is because during that time, the deciding factor was not race. And if you were a man living during that time, you would not have the mentality that you do today. If you are a black man living in the year 1692, you would not be thinking about race. Race will be the last thing on your mind. I guarantee you that. You're talking different now because of the society that you were raised in 2023. But if you were a black man living in 1715, somewhere on the west coast of Africa, you would not be thinking about race. Race would not even be popping into your head at any given time, because human beings are a product of their environment. I don't know how many times I gotta say it on my channel until you guys understand it. But going forward, I'm gonna need y'all, when y'all talk about African history, make the specification. When you're talking about a specific nation, mention the name of the nation, mention the name of the kingdom. Stop speaking in these vague generalities. The Africans. Who is the African? Is there a nation? Is there an ethnic group called the Africans? Like, who is the African? Do they have a constitution? Do they have like a sovereign territory, like their borders? The Africans. It just sounds very uneducated. It sounds very like, just like, it sounds like you don't know what the hell you're talking about, bro. Because I can't have a conversation with you if I don't know which group you're talking about, which nation you're talking about. Because different African people were doing different things, worshiping different deities, dressing different, eating different, dancing different, living different, just like any other continent on the planet. It was a large amount of variety amongst the people. And when it comes to European history, you give them that respect, that honor of individuality, to refer to them. Okay, I'm speaking about the white American, I'm speaking about the Britishman, the Spaniard, the Portuguese. But when it comes to the African, you don't refer to him in his name of his nation. You just say, oh, the Africans. You throw them all in the same boat, from East Coast, West Coast, down to the South and the North. But I just want to know, what is the difference between the African kings and the European kings, right? For every African king that you name that was waging war against other African nations, I can name a European king that was waging war against European nations, right? I'm not going to name the name, but you know what happened during World War II. I could go all the way back to Frederick the Great. Frederick the Great went to war against the Austrians, the French, the Russians, and many other European powers. I could go all the way back to King Charles of Sweden. He went to war against the Russians, the Danes and Norwegians. I could go back to King Philip of Spain, who led the Spanish Armada against the British. The list goes on and on, bro. That's history. That's the history of men. That's what men have been doing. That's what men are still doing. And the reason why I understand the context of pre-colonial African history, how the different African nations had conflicts, times of peace, times of war, times of trade, times of commerce, times of mutual agreement, times of rivalries, alliances, etc., because the same exact thing occurred on the island of Hispaniola. Even though many would say on both sides of the island, there's a decent population of black people, but there was no different. It was no different. There were times of peace. There were times of war. It was times of commerce, times of trade, times of discord, times of alliance, times of rivalry. The whole aspect, the whole totality. I understand it. So I could understand the context of pre-colonial African history. The same way how, two neighboring states could go to war. The same way the Haitians and the Dominicans, they went to war. I could understand these things. So I never hold it against my ancient African ancestors or my continental African brothers, because I understand the geopolitical context of the situation, bro. And I'm not here to be no victim. I'm not here to be no victim. I know back in Africa, my ancestors was getting it in. Yeah, they was getting it in. And I enjoy reading about the different battles between African nations. The same way people love talking about the different battles between, the European nations. They love talking about, the Battle of Waterloo and things like that, and the 30 Years' War and all that bullshit, and all the battles between the Americans and the British and the French and the British and the French and the Spanish and all that nonsense. If we can learn about that, people are fascinated by that, then why do we have to minimize African history? Why? What's the difference between Napoleon Bonaparte and Shaka Zulu? What's the difference between Napoleon Bonaparte and Askia Muhammad the Great from the Songhai Empire? I mean, what's the difference? There was no difference. They were men who were a product of their time. They were a product of their environment. And if you were living during that time, you'd be right alongside with them doing the same damn thing. So in summary, man, stop attaching that victim narrative to my ancestors who were sold into slavery. Yes, my ancestors were sold into slavery, but I'm not going to use that to hold that against the modern day continental African, especially when I understand the political context of that time period. Because in order to try to play that victim card in the modern day, You have to rewrite the history to make it seem like your ancestors were some innocent victims that would never hurt a fly, that never shot a gun, that never swung a sword. We never engaged in any type of warfare and conquest. We don't have a single military battle documented on record. That's what you make it sound like, and that's not the case. That's not the case. It's not the case, okay? No. Embrace your ancestors in their full totality, in their full personalities. Some of us in the diaspora, we came from agricultural societies. Some of us in the diaspora, we came from more spiritual societies. Some of us in the diaspora, we came from military societies. Now, maybe you might have just been, just a regular peasant farmer or something like that. But I trace my lineage back. I know I come from a long line of military societies. Yeah. Niggas was swinging their sword at the age of 10. So anyways, bro, just stop it, bro. Just stop it, man. Stop it. Everybody in the diaspora who got sold into slavery is not a bitch. It's not a victimized, just they sold me into slavery. The cousin is having sold me into slavery. Oh my God, bro. Be quiet. Be quiet, bro. Grow up. Grow up. Anyways, man, it's your boy Never Card. That's Celine back in the building. Yes, indeed. Cash App up on the screen, and I'm gone. Peace.
Reincarnated, I'm back in original fashion. I left on a horse and came back in that ass, and I left with abundance and came back to famine. We used to be pyramids, now we be rapping. Look how the mighty have fallen. Used to be running, now we be walking. When you be cooning, that's when they applauded. Selling your soul, your sons and your daughter. Gotta come up in this shit, they stuck in the mix. Really, my heart it be breaking. That's why I'm stacking that paper and handle my business. Pass it down in generation. Talking about money and power and building a nation. That's a deadly combination. Never be watching the TV, they pushing agendas, falsifying information. No, they got malice intentions. Step in the room and I'm feeling the tension. Enemy watching, he blocking my vision. Pay for the check cause I need my redemption. Building my kingdom, I need it protected. Ready for war like a young Money Congo. Never decided the team is the motto. Up in the crib and I'm whipping up waffles. Up in the crib and I'm smoking gelato. I'm chilling, I'm taking my pain and make it ambition. I'm blessed by the gods, but I ain't religious. I came for the power, they came for the bitch. They making no hourly wage, I got business. This shit is an art and they could never be taught. Selling my soul, I can never be bought. Play with my money, I see you ain't caught. Run to the check and I do it for sport. Babylon falling, I go to the source. Packing my luggage and go overseas. Shorty be with me and she so elite. Shorty be chocolate, I'm calling her Hershey. Secret intelligence probably gon' murk me. Don't fuck with brands cause nigga I'm Haitian. Say the wrong shit and you're smacking their faces.